Well, hi dudes. I met a lot of you last year who watched the channel and said hi. Thanks for that. It's always great to get your feedback. I think 3 or 4 crew said they had been inspired to buy a boat and live this lifestyle, so that's fantastic. Quite a few of you dudes have asked for information on the best boat to buy to go cruising on. So here we go. A video on my ideas of the best boat to use for long-term cruising, or even one you can finish your days on. Well, we don't wear skimpy bikinis. Hell, it frightens me when I take my shirt off. There's definitely no one pregnant here. This is motor sailing for old dudes. We do live on a boat, and we do cruise extensively along the Australian coast. Join us and visit some great destinations. Learn how to look after a boat and live off grid. It might even get you enthused to do the same thing. Hey, stay out there till you can't. First of all, you have to realise that the average ownership of a boat is about 3 years. So people buy boats, they enjoy them for a year or maybe 2, and then they don't use them for a year and then they want to sell them. That's the average amount of time that people are into boats for. You have to look at cost. If you're buying a boat, you've got to be able to afford it, and there's all types of boats and all sorts of price ranges as well, so that'll come down to your financial situation. But be aware that if you do buy a boat, it's not going to evaluate the same way as, say, real estate does. Boats tend to devaluate quite quickly. Even if they hold their price, you'll find you spend a lot of money maintaining them over the years for them to hold their price. So don't buy a boat thinking you're going to make dollars of it. I would say don't even think about buying a fixer-upper and thinking you're going to make dollars of it, because the cost of getting it up to a stage where you can sell it is probably going to cost you more than what you'll get for it. What size of boat do we need to cruise on? And I guess I should finish that sentence with comfortably. So you can cruise on any sort of boat. I've seen people living on 32 footers. That's probably about 10 metres. I know friends of mine are living on a 10-metre boat and have been doing so for the last 2 years, and I think they're going to finish their life on it. So really the size of boat doesn't really matter, but I think if the boat is bigger, there's more chance that you're going to be able to live on it for a longer term. Now when I say bigger, I'd say top of the tree is about 50 foot, or that would be probably 14 metres. But about a 50-foot boat, I'd say it's about as big as you want to go. If you get a bigger boat, fine, but the bigger they get, the more expensive they are to maintain, the more things there are to do, the more anti-foul paint you've got to buy, the more expensive they are to put in marinas, so you have to take all of these things into account. But I say around the 40, 45 foot mark is a pretty good average for a boat that you can live on comfortably and do it for long term. What sort of boat are you going to buy? Are you going to buy a catamaran or a monohull, or maybe a trimaran? And I've seen some of the YouTubers out there, La Vagabond, have just gone to a high performance trimaran. Nice boat, very quick. I don't know how practical it is for a cruising lifestyle. With that sort of boat, you pay an awful lot to put it in a marina because of its width and length, and the living space on it is probably half of the size that you'd have on a smaller catamaran. So these are things you need to take into account. They've got a lovely boat there, and I'm sure their videos are going to be interesting coming up, but yeah, there's a lot of boat there that you're paying for that maybe you don't need. Okay, so if you go for cat or mono, like it's a matter of preference. Usually you'll find that monohulls are a lot less expensive than catamarans. Catamarans seem to have a bit of a premium price on them. So with cats, usually a little bit more expensive, but you're usually getting a bit more living space on a catamaran than you do on a monohull. The other things I like about catamarans, and look, I'm a catamaran man, I've lived on this cat for 20 years, so I'm a bit biased. But the other thing I like about catamarans is it tends to be all pretty well on one level. So you're not up and down a companionway to get into your living space. And that's a bonus, I think. A catamaran sort of divides up the living spaces better. Usually you'll have at least two cabins for bedrooms, maybe one in each home, up to four sometimes, and maybe two bathrooms, which is a pretty good configuration. If you can get a cat with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, you can use one bedroom for your own use and then have another cabin that crew can come aboard and stay on. So that's a pretty good configuration. And before I go any further, we're just going to head inside because it's starting to rain here in sunny Queensland. Well, sorry about that. It just goes to show how much I'm governed by the weather. Okay, so cat or mono, it can be a personal choice, but either way, you can usually pick up a decent boat that you can live on long term. There's plenty of people living on cats and plenty of people living on monohulls that are cruising long term. So type of construction, what do we want this boat built out of? The 3 or 4 major types, well the 3 major types I guess are steel, aluminium and GRP or fiberglass. You can get ferro cement boats still, but they're very hard to insure now. And ferro cement boats were never a bad boat if they were built properly, but unfortunately there was a lot of home built ones that weren't very well built and they got a bit of a bad name for that, bit of a bad rap. But yeah, you don't see too many ferros around, although there are still boats around with people living on them, and it's probably a good cheap way to get into the liveaboard market if you're prepared to wear a ferro cement boat. But if you are going to buy a ferro cement boat, make sure that it's a well-built one and everything's right, because as I said, the big problem with them now is it's hard to get insurance, and the trouble with that is if it's hard to get insurance, it's very hard to get into marinas because marinas won't let you inhabit them without comprehensive insurance these days. So something to think about. Okay, steel and aluminium. Some people swear by steel boats or aluminium boats. The only thing I don't like about steel, it does tend to rust. And look, there's better treatments around these days to keep them going. First boat I cruised on was a 34-foot steel boat that I built myself. But I tell you what, the levels of maintenance that went into it were quite high. You had the paintbrush out all the time. And this is going back 40 years, so the finishes and the treatments we've got, the metal treatments we've got now, weren't there. It was all a bit iffy, but you did tend to keep it looking okay, and I can't be on a boat that looks ordinary. I'm just the way I am, a bit OCD, I think, but I like my boat to look all right. So I found that I was moving around with a paintbrush quite regularly on the steel boat. They are very strong. Repairs are quite easy. You can cut plates out, put plates in and do that. The other downside of a steel boat, if you ever have got to modify anything, all of that grinding dust just creates rust. So that's a real problem. But yeah, a lot of people swear by steel boats. You can sit them on a rock and they'll stay there for a fair while before you breach them and sink them. But yeah, that's one thing they've got going for them. Aluminium boats, probably a bit the same, but they don't rust, but you can have corrosion problems with them. And look, most aluminium boats live a pretty long life. The only thing you have to be very careful of is getting dissimilar metals in around the aluminium. So I saw one boat once the only thing keeping it afloat was the anti-fouling paint, because when we went to anti-foul it, we pushed the roller through the bottom of the boat, and that was because an electrician had dropped a copper eyelet off a wire down into the bilge, and it sat in the bilge underneath the shaft gland where there was water, and that bit of copper just created electrolysis with the aluminium plating, and we had to cut about a 1 foot square piece of aluminium out of the bottom of that boat and repair it. So just be aware of those dissimilar metals that might give you problems with aluminium boats. I think fiberglass is probably the best means of building a boat. As far as maintenance go, it's pretty easy to look after. As long as you keep a bit of wax up to the gel coat, usually you can maintain it for quite a number of years. Yeah, it's a pretty handy product to do. Repair is, once you get used to doing it, I call it kindergarten material, because it's not very hard to do repairs. Once you get into it a bit, you'll find you'll be able to repair fiberglass pretty well. So I like fiberglass. Now there's different types of fiberglass. You've got solid glass. This boat, for instance, the hull is solid glass, and I like that. I think that's the strongest method, really. And then you have other things like foam sandwich or timber sandwich. From the deck up on this boat is timber sandwich, so it's plywood encapsulated in fiberglass. On the inside of the cabin here, I've left the plywood out, so it's glassed on the outside but not on the inside. But you get other core materials such as closed cell foam, there's honeycomb fillers. There's also, I think, an aluminium core you can get for fiberglass these days. So all of these things are great, and it makes for a lighter boat. I think as far as maintenance goes, the top of the tree has got to be fiberglass. It's a lot less intensive as far as maintenance goes. Oh, and of course, they've been building boats out of wood for hundreds of years, and there's still a lot of timber boats around, lots of different construction methods, but on the whole, timber vessels do tend to take a fair bit of maintenance, so you've got to be at them all the time. Lovely boats, but you have to be pretty dedicated. Okay, hull shape. What I'm talking about here is the actual shape of the hull, and probably the shape of the hull at the waterline. So some of the things I've seen on boats is boats with a big counter, so a stern that comes up above the waterline and curves up towards the transom of the boat. Really good to give it good sailing attributes, but the problem with that is when you're at anchor, and you're at anchor a lot if you're cruising, you spend more time at anchor than you do travelling anywhere. So with that counter at anchor, if you get wave action coming in from behind the boat, you'll get that slapping up underneath the counter, and a lot of people just can't sleep with that wave action slapping against the counter of the boat. You'll see sometimes they hang fenders down under the back of the boat to stop that occurring. I've seen power boats with a chine. A chine is something where the hull comes up curved and then it breaks out and then comes up. It's to give you more volume inside a catamaran. So the hull will be quite narrow, which is very efficient for driving it through the water. When it gets to a certain height, there's a chine that's pushed out and then the hull continues up. Now if that chine's close to the waterline, you'll get wave action slapping under that all of the time. And a good mate of mine, Bruce, who you've probably seen on my videos, he's got a power cat that had those chines in it, and about 5 years ago we filled the chines in. So Bruce just found it very hard to sleep on the boat with the wave action slapping up against the bottom of the chines there. So that's something to take into account. I guess headroom's another thing. This boat's got lots of headroom. When I built it to servo, and I knew I was bringing secondary school kids on, and the next generation is 6 inches taller than my generation. So there's plenty of headroom in this boat. But if you are a tall person, make sure that you're not going to be stooped all the time when you're moving around inside the boat. I guess the other question is whether you go for a sailboat or a powerboat. Powerboat is it's debatable, but it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive getting anywhere because you've got to pay for fuel. So that's going to depend entirely on the size of your motors and the efficiency of your boat. But sailing doesn't come cheap. Replacing sails every 5 or 6 years and all running rigging and standing rigging is quite expensive. So you've got to weigh all that up. I think that as you get older, it's probably a little bit easier to motor, but I do like sailing, and I like the steady trip you get with a bit of sail out. So on this boat, I've just got a head sail, very easy to handle. I can unfurl it and furl it up on my own, and it's a very easy sail to handle, and that gives us a knot or two, and it really does steady the motion of the boat up. So motor sailing for me is the way to go. The purists out there will say no, they've got a sail, but how long can you do it for? Like if you're cranking winches, and it is getting easier. They've got electric winches and that sort of thing now that does make it easier to hoist sails and control sails. So you know, more complicated, of course, but there are things there that you can sail probably as you get a bit older with the aids that there are around now for helping you to handle sails. So yeah, something that's a very personal choice, I guess. The other thing is, if you're sailing, you're always looking for that bit of wind, and sometimes you can have a bit too much. If you're motoring, what you're looking for is really calm weather, and I think sometimes it's easier to pick the calm bits and travel in them than it is to pick the amount of wind you need to get there using a bit of sail. So I think even the people on the sailboats, a lot of people that have got full-blown sailboats, they do motor sail a lot. The purists won't do it. They'll wait till the wind's right or tack into it, which no one in the cruising game really likes beating into the wind, but the purists will do it. Yeah, they're all things you've got to take into account. For some reason, I think people look at getting into retiring onto a boat and they think it's got to be a yacht. It doesn't have to be a yacht. It could be a powerboat. If you're handy with mechanics and mechanical things and things like that, a powerboat might be what you require. And especially on monos, a lot of guys put their wives on a mono and want to sail it, and when the boat heels over, a lot of the women don't really feel comfortable with that heel angle. They think it's going to tip right over, I think. So, yeah, all things to take into account when you're making that decision between a powerboat and a sailboat. And, of course, a sailboat does give you a lot more range. You can travel overseas. If you're doing overseas passages, it's definitely going to have to be a sailboat of some sort, or a big powerboat that's got lots and lots of fuel, because you'll need a lot of range. But for coastal work, that's what I'm doing. I think the motor sailing configuration works pretty well. It does for me anyway. Okay, I guess another question I get is Flybridge or no Flybridge? I'm not a big fan of Flybridges for a couple of reasons. I think Flybridges are the most uncomfortable place to be on a boat when you're at sea, because you're a fair bit higher than the water level, and of course that gives you a pendulum effect, so you're going to move around a lot more on the Flybridge than you are down at deck level. It does give you good visibility from up there, so you can look around, especially if you're travelling in amongst reef and stuff like that, so you can see a bit better. The other thing I don't like about Flybridges, to get to the side of the boat if you're docking, it means coming down a ladder or stairs to get to the stern of the boat or wherever you're tying up. So it's a little bit of a chore getting off that Flybridge and getting to where you can tie the boat up. Now you can overcome that these days, and a lot of Flybridge boats are built with little consoles in the cockpit that you can actually steer the boat from. So with a Flybridge boat, I think especially if you're looking at using it by yourself, make sure you've got a second station somewhere that makes it easier for you to dock the boat, and that'll make life a lot easier as well. I think with any boat, it's pretty important, and I'm talking about 45-foot boats. I'm not talking about white boats and 100-footers and 60-metre boats and all of that, but smaller boats that normal people could probably live on and cruise on. I think it's pretty important you can handle it by yourself. It's great when you've got crew on because it does make it easier, but if you can handle a boat by yourself, usually it makes it easier for crew to come on because they know you can handle it by yourself. So I like my boats to be set up in a way that I can handle the boat by myself. And if you look at the setup here at the helm, from the helm position to the side deck is one step. And then I've got walk around decks on the boat so I can move forward or aft on either side. I've got good access to the side decks. And if I'm using the boat and bringing it into a berth or trying to pick up a mooring or even anchoring, I can walk out onto that side deck and move around the boat quite easily. So it's pretty well set up for that. And I believe that you should be able to handle your boat when you're a solo sailor. Some boats won't lend themselves to that, and as long as you've got a solid partner, fantastic. The two of you will get used to handling the boat. A lot of guys I know, they teach their wives to handle the boat, to helm the boat, and they'll do the anchor work and the mooring work because they're a bit stronger. So that's some things you can think about. But yeah, if you can handle a boat yourself, it takes the pressure off the partner a fair bit as well. Okay, engine types. They'll fall into three categories. They'll be inboard or outboard. There's two categories. And then the inboard engine will have either diesel or petrol. Now, you do see quite a few boats around with petrol engines in them. Usually they're smaller boats and day boats. I wouldn't advise anyone to buy a petrol engine boat ever if you're going to cruise on the boat. If you're going to use it as a day boat or a ski boat or something like that, fine. But if you're going to do some serious cruising and live on the boat, I think you have to go for a diesel boat. Outboards, they're petrol driven 9 times out of 10, and I don't like outboards either. The reason I don't like outboards and inboard petrol motors is the flammability of the fuel. And I've seen in my lifetime in boats, I've seen I think 3 boats go up big time with petrol engines in them and just explode. So you drop a bit of that petrol in, if you get a leak and that petrol drops into the bilge, it's heavier than air, so the gas, the fumes just fill the bilge up. And then you hit the key to start the boat up. This is when it usually happens. When the starter motor starts, it throws out a nice big blue spark and kaboom. And people have definitely lost their lives and been severely burnt on petrol-powered boats. So I don't like them. The other thing is diesel engines are a lot more reliable than petrol boats. They don't have spark plugs or distributors or coils or all the electronics or fuel injection, electronic fuel injection. Try to remember that electronics on the boat are the first thing that are going to let you down. Electronics in a salt air environment, really, they don't like it. So try and keep away from anything electronic. This even goes with the new common rail diesel engines you find in a lot of boats now, because all of those common rail diesels are electronically controlled, usually have electronically fired injectors. They usually have lots of sensors to sense what's going on with the motor. And the trouble with all of those sensors is if one is faulty, your motor goes into, you know, idle mode or something like that. So what do? Do you carry all of these sensors as spare parts? It just makes it pretty hard. I think a bog standard old diesel motor, mechanically driven, mechanical injectors, well, mechanical hydraulic injectors, but just a bog standard, the John Deeres, the Kubotas, the Gardners, they are great engines to have in a boat because you can fix them. And usually with a diesel engine, one of these diesel engines anyway, once you get it started, it's going to run. They very rarely just stop running. If they do stop running, there's only 2 things you've got to look at. It's either going to be fuel or it's going to be air not getting to the motor. Sometimes electronics can let you down, but we won't get into that. But that'll be just a starter, like a fuel rack coil or something like that. But as long as you feed a diesel motor with fuel, usually it'll keep going. So I like the diesel engines on a boat. And of course, the flammability of the fuel is nothing. If you drop diesel into the bilge of your boat, it's not going to give off fumes and it's not going to become a fire risk. So you've got that. Be aware that when you're injecting diesel into an engine under high pressure, if you split a fuel line, that could cause a fire, because atomised diesel will catch fire pretty quickly and burn quite quickly as well. So there is a fire risk there, but it's a lot less than on the explosive type of fire you're going to get on a petrol driven boat. Engine room access is another thing. You see a lot of boats, and I think a lot of boats are built these days, they build the hull, they install the motors and everything else, and then they plonk the deck on top. And sometimes the access to the engine rooms is just atrocious. And if you're great when you're a young person, you can get in, you're quite flexible, you can do all that. But as an older dude, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting into some of these really confined engine spaces. I'd love an engine room where I can walk down steps into an engine room that I can stand up in, and the motor would be right in the centre of the engine room, toolbox over here, esky over there. I could live my life in there, I reckon. You're not going to find that sort of an engine room on catamarans up to 45 feet. But the engine rooms on this boat, I've made them quite accessible, because when I open the hatch, you're looking straight down on top of the motor. So you're not going in through a hatch and then crawling up to where the motor is. You're looking straight down on top of it. And that was one of the features I wanted to put on the boat when I built it. So that really makes servicing the engines a lot easier. You've still got to climb in and out of there, but once you're in there, you can virtually stand up and work your way around the motors. So make sure you have a look at engine room access. And some of the motors I've seen that have been poured into boats where you can't even get your hands down the side of the engine to do work on them, it just makes it really hard, because don't forget, all engines are going to get tighter as you use them, and there's going to be things that need to be done when they're brand new. Probably for 2,000 or 3,000 hours you won't put a spanner near them, but after that things will start going wrong and you'll have to access those motors. And if you've got a bit of room around them, it makes life a lot easier, especially if you're an old dude. The other thing about boats is the complexity of a boat, and this boat is pretty simple. There's nothing complex on it. A lot of things I do, I tie things up with rope, I use bungee cord and things like that. I hate putting electronics on the boat because, well, I've got to have nav equipment. I've got an echo sounder, I've got a chart plotter, I've got an automatic pilot, and they're all things that you just have to have on a boat. But as far as having windows that open and shut with electric motors, or tele motors opening and shut engine hatches or deck hatches, I reckon you're just making a job for yourself as you get older. And some of the other YouTubes I watch Brewpeg, and good on them having a crack at restoring that old trawler, but by geez, they're making it complicated. And the amount of electronics that going on there, I don't think they'd ever live on that boat to be old people, because they would be chasing the systems around on that boat like you wouldn't believe. But anyway, have a look at that and see how a complex boat is built. And this is a pretty basic, simple boat. And I think it's good. Keep it simple, stupid. I think that pays dividends as you get older. Okay, you've got to look at the self-sufficiency of the boat too, because if you've got a boat that is pretty self-sufficient, what I'm saying, you've got enough battery power to keep you going every day. You can stay out for as long as you like. I've done that on this boat only in the last couple of years with the lithium-ion batteries I've put on. They've been fantastic, and a new array of solar panels on the roof. It's been fantastic because I never have to go into a marina. Actually, I'm tied up in a marina now. I don't even have the shore power hooked up because I don't need to. The sun keeps the boat running the whole time. And if you can make your boat self-sufficient, you save a lot of money if you're cruising, because marinas are getting quite expensive these days. You're looking at $100 odd a night for a catamaran in most marinas and over. So staying in marinas can be quite an expensive exercise, whereas you can be self-sufficient and stay on the pick. That doesn't cost you anything yet. They'll find a way, don't you worry about that. But yeah, anchoring out is a lot cheaper than staying in marinas. So be self-sufficient. Water makers is another way to be self-sufficient. I'm just doing coastal work. I don't have a water maker on board because of the complexity of having a water maker. Something else to go wrong and something else to fix. So I don't have a water maker, and I think if you're just doing coastal work and in not too remote areas, you can get away with it. I catch water off the roof, and I do have to put fuel on the boat probably every week or so if I'm doing a lot of travelling. And if I go and put fuel on, I can usually pick up water as well. So my tanks on the boat are 800 litres, so I've got 400 litres in either side. I know when I get down to 400 litres on the port side, I've only got 400 litres to go on the starboard side, so I know when I'm starting to run out. But with 800 litres and 2 of us on board, we can stretch that out for at least a month, having not long showers, but you know, just using that water wisely, and you can make it stretch to about a month, and then hopefully you get some rain. Toilet and shower facilities, a lot of boats don't have them. A lot of boats will have porta potties, smaller boats. I think a marine toilet makes life a lot easier. You'll have to look at holding tanks as well, and I'd say, well, there should be 100% of boats in Queensland that have holding tanks on them, but there's probably 99.9% of those boats don't use them, and there's a whole debate on whether you should use them. I definitely use my holding tank in the marina or use the shore facilities, but when you're out at sea or out on the pick somewhere and there's a lot of tidal flow, there's a big debate, and I'm not going to get onto it. But anyway, I think you need some sort of toilet. I like keeping my toilet and my shower separate. A lot of boats, because of the space requirements, will put the toilet and shower in the one room, and I think most of the time you end up with a wet toilet seat or soggy toilet paper, and it just doesn't do it for me. So I've got this boat set up with a head standing alone and a shower standing alone. Okay, working our way down to the aft end of the boat, and I guess the davit and dinghy is a pretty important thing too, because unless you want to use your boat and stay on it full time, you need to get ashore. And I think a dinghy and a davit that is easy to use really, well, encourages me to put the dinghy in the water and go ashore. It's a 1 minute tops operation for me to launch the dinghy, and probably the same to get it back out of the water. I like pulling the dinghy out of the water every night for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't get barnacles growing on the bottom of it, and two, it's not going to get pilfered. So if you leave them in the water, they can either get lost or pilfered. Sometimes they can be pinched. So I like to just lift it out of the water every night. And the other thing is, if the weather comes up during the night and you have to shift, I don't want to be worried about the dinghy being behind the boat and being towed. I'd rather it be aboard, and that's one worry out of the equation of being on a lee shore or something when the weather comes in and you have to move. Sleeping arrangements. I think you need a couple of cabins, unless you're really a hermit, and a lot of boats just have a double berth in the forepeak. But I think if you've got, and maybe they'll have a quarter berth or something for friends to stay on. It's smaller boats, but on a 45-foot boat you should be able to get a couple of cabins into that, and it's always handy to have a couple of sleeping berths. If you have friends come on board, you can accommodate them. Of course, galley tables sometimes go down and make into a bunk, and that's fine, especially kids will sleep anywhere. They'll sleep on stuff like that. I really hate putting tables up and down to do all that sort of thing, so I don't bother with it. But I've got 3 cabins on this boat, one that's full of junk all the time we can't really use, but there's 2 cabins that are usable all the time, and they do get used a fair bit. Another thing I want to touch on is refrigeration. I run 2 fridges on this boat, and you do need refrigeration. Look, a lot of people do without it. A lot of people have got the esky type, I don't know, tucker box type fridges with the little 12-volt electric motors in. They're fine, but you do need some sort of refrigeration, I think, just to keep your milk and your butter and things like that from going rancid. But I've known people that have sailed around the world without refrigeration, and they reckon they can do it. So you know, there's plenty to be said for not having it. It's something you don't have to look after, that's for sure. Not that you have to look after your refrigeration units, but they are something that might let you down. I think in the 20 years I've had this boat, I've had 2 fridges in the galley, so the one I built it with, and then I've had to replace that once. And the fridge out the back, I've replaced that once as well. So I get about 15 years out of a fridge unit. And these are little 12-volt units that run off the lithium-ion batteries, and I find that they're pretty efficient. On my lithium-ion setup, I'm losing about 5 or up to 10% a night to run the fridges, and that's virtually the biggest draw on your house batteries is the fridge units. So don't have too many. You don't need 3 fridges and a freezer and an ice maker. Try and do it with a couple of fridges, and remember that it saves on what your battery capacity's got to be to run all of that as well. And apart from having 12-volt units, there are engine-driven ones. A bit of a pain because I don't like starting the motors when I'm at anchor. I like the 12-volt ones that are driven off my solar, but there are engine-driven ones, there are gas ones, which I really don't like because they've got a pilot light and LP gas on a boat. Gas in the bilge has the same effect as what petrol in the bilge would have. It's a real explosion danger, if you like. So in the galley, you need some form of cooking, and a lot of boats do have LP gas. I'm all electric now. I've got plenty of solar power and batteries there to run a 240-volt induction stovetop and an oven. I do a lot of cooking on the barbecue at the back, so I do have gas on the boat, but it's above deck. It's out the back of the boat. It's in its own locker, so I don't have any risk of the gas getting down into the hulls and creating a bomb, if you like. So I like the setup I've got there, but a lot of boats, mono and multi, will have maybe galleys down with gas running to them. It's just the way it's done. The other types of cooking you get is kerosene stoves or metho stoves. They're all great on some boats, just a little bit of mucking around. They can be a little bit dangerous with a bit of a risk of having a bit of a flare up as well. So there's things like that. And of course you can get the little propane bottle stoves, the very small ones. They'd work on some smaller boats as well. Be aware of them because that LP gas in that tank, if you let it leak and then create a spark, it expands some phenomenal amount when it leaves the liquid state and turns gaseous. As it comes out of that can, it expands greatly, and if you put a spark near it, you'll get an explosion. And I have seen people burnt from using those little propane, little canister gas bottles on boats. And I think if you read the instructions, it says you shouldn't use it in an enclosed area, so they're made to use outside where the fuel, if it leaks, will be dispersed by the air. So be aware of that. I think electric is pretty safe, and the boat here is set up really well for do it. What instruments do you need on a boat? Well, you definitely need a chart plotter. Can't survive these days without a chart plotter. You need some sort of depth sounder as well. So you need an echo sounder to show you how deep the water is. They're must-haves. And I think you need a autopilot. So if you're doing any sort of trips anywhere, an autopilot takes you away from the helm. To be standing at the helm and doing a trip, spending 10 hours standing at a wheel, doesn't do much for me, and I think I'd rather cut my arm off than lose my auto helm, my autopilot. So an autopilot's very important piece of kit. You definitely need a chart plotter. We need to know where we are all the time. My boating goes back to the days where you laid your position off on a chart and you took a fix every hour with a hand-bearing compass, and you only really knew where you were every hour. But now with GPS, you know where you are all the time, and that is fantastic. Back it up with an iPad. I always have my charts that I use on the plotter backed up on the iPad on my phone. So make sure you back your charts up. And yeah, that makes life a lot safer on the water. I think it's got a lot more people out on the water, GPS, because back in the day, you had to be able to navigate a bit, and it was a bit of a dark art. I don't know why, because I used to be able to do it, but yeah, it was looked upon as being a dark art. But with chart plotters now, definitely need a chart plotter. Some people have 2 chart plotters, so they've got redundancy, but you can do it with an iPad or an iPhone these days. And a lot of boats that are travelling overseas, long distances, will have 2 autopilots just to have that redundancy. And redundancy on a boat is a pretty important thing. When we talked about motors, A lot of monohull boats will only have the single motor. Most catamarans will have 2 motors, and that straight away gives you redundancy. It also gives you 2 motors to service and look after, and 2 motors to feed with fuel. I still believe that having that redundancy is an easy way to make things safer. If something goes wrong with one engine, as long as they're both set up individually, you can keep on going on the other motor while you address any problems you might have. So that's one upside of a catamaran, I suppose, that you've got the redundancy of 2 motors. The downside is you've got 2 motors to service and look after all the time as well. And on a monohull boat with a single diesel motor, look, you get a diesel started, it'll run for hours and hours and hours and not give you any trouble. As long as you keep the fuel clean, keep the oil clean, do little things like that, change your filters and all that, you'll have a good run out of a diesel motor in a mono boat. So don't be too worried. The first boat I had was a steel boat. It had one 6-cylinder diesel engine in it. Took us up the coast and all the way back to Victoria. Never missed a beat. And it was a second-hand motor when I put it in the boat. Okay, that gets us down to storage, and having storage depends on the size of your boat. As long as you maximise the spaces you've got in your boat to accommodate storage. A lot of times settees are built with no storage underneath them, and you have big void spaces that you can't use. So under seats and that, you should have provision for storing things. What are you going to need to store? You're going to need to store food. So you'll have to have a locker where you've got a pantry virtually where you store food. You're going to have to store tools. So you're going to have to store woodworking tools and engineering tools, because you've got to service your motor. You'll need mechanical tools to do that, and you'll need a little kit of woodworking tools if you're going to do any fiberglassing. You'll have to store fiberglassing tools as well, rollers and resin and things like that. So they're things. You're going to have to store life jackets. They need to be stored somewhere as well. In my case, I need to store a bit of camera gear as well, so that comes up. You might have to store grog. Clothes are another thing you'll have to store, so you need lockers to hang clothes in or store clothes in. So storage comes into it as well, and a boat with a fair bit of storage is always a good thing to find, because it just makes life a little bit easier. And on a boat, we really don't want stuff laying around everywhere. It should be stowed away somewhere. You'll know the first time you take a boat to sea and you haven't got stuff stored why you should do that, because with stuff falling all over the floor and rolling around at your feet while you're trying to helmet in rough conditions, the worst feeling in the world. So have your stuff stowed, and yeah, that's what storage is for. Well, listen, dudes, I think I've run out of things to talk about. I hope this has been interesting for you. I hope that it further inspires you to maybe buy a boat and live this lifestyle, but have a look at all the things I've covered and make an informed decision. It mightn't be the best financial decision you make, but I can assure you it will be the best lifestyle decision you ever make. Cheers, dudes. Catch you on the next video.